Imagine an entire international diplomatic alliance just, freezing over a selfie.
Right, literally a selfie.
Right. No complex trade disputes, no escalating military threats, just two powerful world leaders publicly arguing over who begged whom for a photo op.
It sounds completely made up, but it happened.
It really did. And today we're looking at a document that takes this exact wildly petty G7 spat between U.S. President Donald Trump and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and attempts to solve it using ancient Vedic mysticism. Welcome to the deep dive. We are exploring a highly unique text today titled Donald Trump's Field of Invincibility.
And it is a genuinely fascinating read because it completely bypasses traditional political science. I mean, it doesn't look at poll numbers or economic leverage at all.
Not even a little bit.
No, instead, it promises this radical solution for global geopolitics by merging modern political analysis with ancient spiritual concepts, specifically the idea of tapping into what it calls the unified field.
Okay, so let's unpack this right away, because the source we are diving into today contains some very politically charged figures and events.
Very much so.
And we want to make it crystal clear right up front that we are not taking any political sides today. Our goal is strictly to explore the fascinating ideas and perspectives presented in this specific source material without endorsing them.
Exactly. We are just here to examine the lens the author uses, all right, which looks at this recent, highly publicized diplomatic clash through the framework of ancient epics and spiritual technologies.
Right, so to understand the weight of that spiritual analysis, we really have to establish the real-world incident that triggered this whole document.
Yeah, the catalyst.
Exactly. The text points to the recent G7 summit in France. And the tension didn't start over a policy disagreement. It started with an interview President Trump gave to the Italian television channel La 7.
Right, and during this interview, Trump claimed that Prime Minister Meloni had, quote, begged him for a photograph.
Begged him.
Yeah, and he actually went a step further, suggesting the only reason he even agreed to take the picture was because he felt sorry for her.
Oh, wow. I mean, in the high-stakes world of international optics, that is a remarkably sharp, calculated jab. It's totally designed to immediately attack a leader's standing and, their projection of power.
Oh, absolutely. And Meloni's response, which the source details, was incredibly swift. She expressed absolute astonishment at the remark, calling Trump's claims completely made up.
Which is a strong counterstrike.
Very strong. She then issued a very firm, definitive declaration stating, neither I nor Italy ever beg. Notice the shift there, actually.
Oh, right. She links her personal image directly to the national identity of Italy.
Exactly. She binds her own ego to the nation's ego. And the text highlights that this wasn't just a fleeting war of words for the tabloids. It had immediate, tangible geopolitical fallout.
Yeah, this public spat significantly strained the alliance between the United States and Italy.
Correct.
It escalated to the point where Italy's foreign minister actually canceled a planned official trip to the United States.
I mean, just think about that. A major diplomatic mission ground to a complete halt over the competing narratives surrounding a photograph.
It's wild. If we strip away the fancy titles, it feels almost like a petty high school dispute over an Instagram post. Right?
Oh, totally. She begged to be in my selfie. I would never beg to be in your selfie.
Exactly. But because of who these people are, you have massive geopolitical stakes attached to it.
Yeah.
So what does this all actually mean? How does the source transition from a spat over a photo op to ancient mythology?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the source explicitly argues this is not merely a political disagreement. To look at it as just a spat over a photo is to completely miss the underlying mechanics of human behavior.
Right.
The document posits that this is a real-time manifestation of inner darkness. And the text defines this darkness very specifically. It is the ego fighting desperately for supremacy.
Okay, so the ego.
Right. The source asserts that Trump and Meloni in this moment are operating within a modern Kurukshetra.
Kurukshetra. Now, in Vedic tradition, that's the legendary physical battlefield where the great epic wars take place, right?
Yes, but the source is using it here as a psychological metaphor. It represents their current state of being.
The state of being at war.
Exactly. The text argues they are trapped on a mental and spiritual battlefield defined entirely by posturing, optics, and power dynamics. Every interaction is viewed as a fight for survival.
Because to yield, or to apologize, or to simply let a perceived slight go unpunished would feel like a mortal wound to their personal and political egos.
Right. They just can't do it.
So if they are constantly defending themselves from perceived attacks, There has to be an ultimate consequence to living in that state. Which brings us to the mythological mirror the source uses to explain this whole dynamic.
This is where it gets really deep.
Yeah, the text maps this diplomatic incident directly onto an archetypal conflict from the Vedic epics. The legendary battle between two warriors, Arjuna and Duryodhana.
And the synthesis of politics and spirituality in the document really takes shape around these two figures. The crux of this ancient story, as highlighted in the text, comes down to each warrior's fundamental relationship with Lord Krishna.
And this source specifically identifies Krishna here in a very particular form, right? As Kala, the god of time and darkness.
Yes, Kala.
Let's ground that concept
Yeah.
before we move forward for everyone listening. Why focus on time and darkness? Like, why is Kala the ultimate force they have to contend with?
Because time is the ultimate enemy of the ego. Think about it. The political ego craves permanence, right? Unshakable approval ratings, a lasting legacy, statues, total historical dominance.
And time eventually erodes all of that.
Exactly. Time takes it all away. And darkness, in this Vedic context, represents the primordial void. It's the unknown. The force is completely beyond human control.
Which perfectly explains Duryodhana's fatal flaw, according to the text. The source notes that Duryodhana was completely consumed by his ego and his desire for supremacy.
Totally consumed.
When he looked at Krishna, he didn't see the divine force of the universe. He saw a transactional entity. He saw a political asset to be used to win a war, or just a rival to be defeated.
Right. He refused to surrender his own will to anything greater than himself.
So by resisting Kala,
By fighting the ultimate force of time and primordial darkness, yeah.
he essentially made time his ultimate enemy. His ego was completely unchecked.
And because he tried to fight the natural, inevitable flow of the universe, the text argues that all the darkness in the universe just turned against him.
Wow.
Ultimately, it wasn't just opposing armies that defeated him. His own unchecked ego led to his inevitable ruin.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture of our deep dive today, the source diagnoses both Donald Trump and Giorgia Meloni as exhibiting this exact Duryodhana archetype in their current dynamic.
Yes, they are acting out the myth in real time. They are locked in a struggle of self-importance.
That's all ego.
Exactly. The source points out that their inner darkness, which it clearly defines as their pride, their deep-seated need for validation, and their profound fear of appearing weak, is actively pulling them apart.
It's turning them into adversaries when, strategically speaking, they should definitely be allies. They are letting their egos dictate their reactions, actively resisting the natural flow of unity.
Right.
But if Duryodhana represents the ultimate trap of the political ego, where everyone is either a temporary asset or an active threat, there has to be an exit strategy in this mythology. Who actually survives this battlefield?
Well, that is the role of Arjuna in the text. Arjuna is a fierce warrior. He's not, a pacifist avoiding the realities of conflict or leadership.
Right, he's still a leader.
He is, but the source contrasts his internal state very sharply with Duryodhana's.
The source explains that Arjuna actually recognized his own limitations. Despite all his martial skill and worldly power, he voluntarily surrendered his ego at the lotus feet of Krishna.
He yielded his inner darkness to Kala. And by doing that, time stopped being this destructive adversarial force threatening his legacy.
It became his greatest ally instead.
Exactly. The vast darkness of the universe was neutralized for him, allowing him to be guided by the ultimate intelligence of what the text calls the unified field.
It's a profound shift in perspective.
Yeah.
Instead of fighting reality to maintain an inflated artificial sense of self, Arjuna aligns his consciousness with the underlying reality of the universe.
It's brilliant.
But here's where it gets really interesting, and honestly a bit tough to swallow from a practical standpoint.
Yeah.
The source is asking for absolute surrender of the ego.
Right.
But isn't a massive ego practically a job requirement for a global leader?
Right.
I mean, to endure the campaigns, the constant public scrutiny, the relentless attacks from opponents, you have to have an ironclad belief in your own supremacy.
You really do.
So how does the source expect heads of state, of all people, to just abandon the very armor that got them elected in the first place? Telling a politician to drop their ego is like telling a shark to stop swimming. They'll just drown.
It's a highly valid critique, for sure, and it strikes at the core of why this document is so provocative.
Right.
Because the source doesn't just offer this as a nice philosophical thought experiment. It doesn't just say, hey, be more humble. It actually provides a literal, actionable mechanism for this transformation.
Wait, really? An actual mechanism?
Yes.
Yeah.
It argues that leaders can transcend this battlefield of Kurukshetra and enter what it calls Kalakshetra, the field of time and unity. And they achieve this using specific spiritual technologies from an institution called Ecom University.
Spiritual technologies.
Mm.
I mean, it sounds almost like science fiction, but the source is incredibly specific about the
Yeah.
tools required.
Very specific, yeah.
The text proposes that if Trump and Meloni would step away from their ingrained political defenses and regularly practice two things, the Ecom prayer and the soul sync guided meditation, the entire dynamic of their relationship would fundamentally transform.
And the text details exactly how this shift would occur, breaking it down into specific psychological and spiritual mechanisms. The first major shift involves dissolving the illusion of separation.
Okay, dissolving separation.
Right, and it centers heavily on the soul sync practice. According to the document, this meditation is specifically designed to quiet the chaotic, defensive mind.
Like calming the ego down.
Exactly. It connects the individual to Param Jyoti, which the text translates as the supreme light, and immerses them in the unified field.
Wait, let's ground that for a second for the listener. Immerses them in the unified field sounds very abstract. What does the source actually mean by that? Are we talking about a literal shift in brain waves or just a psychological change in perspective?
The source treats the unified field as the foundational reality of existence. It's a state where everything is intrinsically connected and separation is recognized as just an illusion.
So we're all one, basically.
Exactly. The soul sync meditation is presented as a method to actively shift human consciousness from the isolated individual drop back into the ocean of this field. And when consciousness shifts in this way, the incredibly rigid boundaries of the ego begin to soften.
The armor basically dissolves.
Yes, it dissolves. And as a direct result, that desperate, driving need to prove to the world who begged whom for a photograph completely dissolves into insignificance too.
Because it just doesn't matter anymore.
Right. If you are experiencing a state of deep unity, an insult to your personal image doesn't register as a threat because that personal image is recognized as a temporary, unimportant construct.
That makes a lot of sense. And that leads directly into the second mechanism the source talks about, which is surrendering the inner darkness.
Yes, the second step.
If soul sync softens the ego, the Ecom prayer seems to be the tool for actively removing the psychological garbage that the ego has accumulated.
The baggage, basically.
Yeah. The text explains that just like Arjuna surrendered to Krishna, individuals can use the Ecom prayer to essentially lay down their inner burdens. And it specifically notes this is done under the spiritual grace of figures mentioned in the text, like Sri Krishna Pritha Amma.
That concept of spiritual grace is so vital to understanding the mechanism the source is proposing. The text suggests that individuals cannot always overcome their deeply entrenched darkness just through sheer willpower alone.
Right, because using your ego to fight your ego is basically a losing battle.
Exactly, you're just spinning your wheels. The source posits that the spiritual grace of a figure like Sri Krishna Pritha Amma acts as a necessary catalyst. It provides an external spiritual force that assists the individual in genuinely releasing those fears.
They are actively handing over that fear of appearing weak to Kala. And by surrendering those insecurities to Kala, time and darkness stop being enemies that they have to constantly fight off with aggressive press releases and canceled diplomatic trips.
They become integrated forces.
Exactly. It reminds me of a glitching computer running way too many conflicting background programs.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it. Walk us through that analogy.
So think about a computer where the RAM gets completely clogged. You have all these background applications running simultaneously. You've got a program for protecting your poll numbers, a program for protecting dominance, a program scanning the media for insults.
Just eating up all the processing power.
Right. The fans are spinning, the system is overheating, and eventually the whole operating system grinds to a halt over a tiny input, like a photo request.
And it crashes.
Exactly. The soul sync and Ecom prayer practices described in the source feel like a forced software update or just a hard reboot.
Yeah, wiping the slate clean.
They wipe out that temporary cache of grievances and close all those exhausting background applications of pride and paranoia. That way, the underlying system can actually run smoothly again.
Clearing the RAM of the political ego, I like that. It's a very practical way to visualize the spiritual process the text outlines.
But I do have to push back again. Does the source really believe this leads to actual functional diplomacy? Or is the end goal just two world leaders sitting in a room together feeling profoundly peaceful while the rest of the world's complex economic and social problems remain completely unsolved?
Well, the source is remarkably ambitious on this front. It emphatically does not see this as a retreat from leadership, but an elevation of it.
Okay, how so?
The ultimate promise outlined in the text is a complete systemic shift from rivalry to true friendship. And it means friendship in the most literal sense.
It argues that once the ego is fully surrendered to the unified field, the concept of the other is fundamentally changed.
Exactly. The other is no longer perceived as a threat to your power or an obstacle to your legacy. If Trump and Meloni achieved this state of kalakshetra, they wouldn't look across a negotiating table and see a political prop to be exploited or an adversary to be defended against.
They would just see fellow humans.
Yes. The text claims they would operate from a state of expanded consciousness.
And this wouldn't just be polite diplomatic tolerance designed to look good for the cameras. It would allow them to experience a genuine, unshakable friendship rooted in mutual respect.
Right, it completely replaces the traditional zero-sum model of transactional power. By making Kala their friend, they transcend the petty skirmishes of the ego and lead from a space of profound unity and wisdom.
It challenges the very foundation of how we assume statecraft must operate, doesn't it?
Completely. We are so conditioned to believe that geopolitics requires a certain level of ruthlessness and, ego-driven calculation. The text suggests that is an illusion, just a symptom of being trapped in Kurukshetra.
It is a stunningly different vision of how the world could function. I mean, we started this deep dive looking at a canceled diplomatic trip over a perceived slight about an interview in France.
You're so small now.
It really does. We followed the source as it pulled that modern incident back through the ancient battlefields of Vedic epics, casting global leaders as mythological archetypes, fighting the primordial forces of time and darkness.
And finally, we arrive at this vision of heads of state using spiritual technologies, meditating their way out of ego-driven posturing and into a unified field of profound respect.
It reveals how much of what we consider hard politics is actually just fragile human psychology writ large.
It really does.
And I think there's a powerful takeaway here for you listening right now. We might not be navigating international alliances or attending G7 summits, but we all face our own versions of that battlefield.
Every single day.
Yeah, whether you're dealing with an escalating petty dispute in the office or navigating deep-seated tension at a family dinner, the source suggests we all have an inner Duratana.
We all have that part of ourselves that desperately wants to prioritize our pride over our peace.
Right, we all have that ego that wants to armor up and fight back over the equivalent of a bad photo op. And according to this text, we all face the choice to either let that unchecked ego lead to our ruin or to surrender it, tap into a broader perspective, and find a completely different way to operate.
This raises an important question, though, a final thought that really lingers when you push the logic of this document to its absolute limit.
Oh, lay it on us.
Well, the source suggests these spiritual technologies can successfully dissolve the illusion of separation and melt away the personal egos of our leaders. But if that actually happened on a global scale, what happens to the concept of the nation-state itself?
Oh, wow. That is a massive implication, because if you remove the ego, you remove the boundaries.
Think about it. A nation's borders, its distinct economic interests, its military posturing, its entire identity. Conceptually, isn't a nation just a massive collective ego?
It relies entirely on the idea of separation.
Exactly. It requires a clearly defined us versus them. If world leaders actually achieved the expanded consciousness and the profound unity described in this text, could traditional border-based geopolitics even exist?
How do you negotiate a favorable trade deal for your people if you genuinely perceive the people on the other side of the border as inseparable from yourself?
You couldn't. The very concept of national identities, flags, and competing economic zones would inevitably dissolve alongside the personal pride of the leaders.
Because the unified field doesn't recognize border checkpoints.
Exactly. If everyone is tapped into that supreme unity, it's impossible to justify drawing a line in the sand and saying, this side of the field is mine and your side is a threat.
That is something to seriously chew on. If we want our leaders to transcend their egos, we might also have to be prepared for our nations to transcend their borders. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope it gave you a completely new perspective to consider. Keep questioning the forces that drive our world, keep exploring those hidden depths, and remember to keep a close eye on that inner Duryodhana. We'll catch you on the next one.